afternoon to all. As part of the International Women's Day, we are organizing a panel discussion on feminism. I'm delighted to welcome you all to this event. I would like to welcome Professor P.K. Michael Taragan, Chairperson KCHR, and also Professor G. Arunima, Director KCHR, who will be moderating the session later. We would like to extend our special thanks to the discussants of the panel. Today, we have Dr. Aparna Ishwaran, Ms. Priya Tuvasheri, and Ms. Veda Torur Kolleri for the discussion. Dr. Aparna Ishwaran is currently an assistant professor in the School of International Relations and Politics, MG University, Kottayam. Her research interest lies in literature, gender, and international politics. She did her PhD thesis on women and witnessing war, poetry of Tamil women in Sri Lanka. Ms. Priya Tuvasheri is an independent filmmaker and television producer. Her body of work focuses on women and gender. Her stories portrays numerous experiences of the body, environment, community through a feminist perspective. Ms. Priya has been directing, producing, and editing documentary films and television programs for New Delhi Television, CNA, National Human Rights Commission of India, Films Division of India, Public Service Broadcasting Trust, and Khabar Lahariya for over a decade now. Ms. Veda Torur Kolleri is an artist working with organic found material, video, photography, and drawing. She is interested in the ephemerality of organic material and how the evidences the passage or accumulation of time. Ms. Veda has participated in several important exhibitions and residencies, including in the 2018 Kochi Muziris Biennale and Ashkal Alvan's Home Workspace program in Beirut. I'd like to warmly welcome all the discussants to the program. I'd like to cordially welcome all the participants and our KCHR team to the seminar. At the end of the discussion, we'll have the question and answer session, and the participants can type their questions in the chat box. We'll read it out to the speakers, and this will save time. If anyone wishes to be on the KCHR mailing list, please do write your email IDs in the chat box, and it will be added to our mailing list. Now, I would like to invite Professor G. Arunima for the introductory remarks and moderation of the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Akshita. Thank you so much, Aparna, Priya, and Veda for having joined us for this panel discussion. I really wish we had been doing this event in person because apart from everything else, International Women's Day for many of us has meant that we have come together, met, discussed, celebrated. And it's a strange statement of our times that we should be doing this virtually. But in the absence of being able to pull off a in-person event, I am delighted that all of you could be here with us today. When we thought about this year's March 8th, I was wondering whether it was possible to actually have a different kind of event. One which brought together a panel of a different generation of scholars, artists, filmmakers, feminists, who could speak to the question of March 8th itself, which of course, as perhaps many of you know, and some of you don't, comes out of a history of labor struggles. And comes out of a very different working class history. So it's very interesting the way in which March 8th, once it became declared as International Women's Day, I mean, it came out of seamstresses, women who stitch, their struggles. And it came out of the history of a very big strike that had been actually organized in New York. But from there, the travel of the International Women's Day as a commemorative event across the world, March 8th itself has taken different kinds of forms and shapes. And many of us who are earlier, feminists of a different generation, have in the cities, especially in this country, been part of March 8th events which have been vast and varied. I remember things from the latter half of the 70s, early 80s, which centered around marches and protests and demonstrations and speeches and so on. But I myself was involved as an undergraduate in organizing a sort of one-day celebration, which involved a lot of eating and dancing and celebration and, a book exhibition and a judo exhibition and all manners of things. So, so it's taken different kinds of forms depending on what we thought was important, what kinds of questions we were addressing. Right? So as you know, everything is a feminist issue. There is nothing that is not a feminist issue. Right? And this is something that we have all thought about, and our own ideas of feminisms, firstly, the pluralization of the term, and also the ways in which we have identified as feminists has changed over time. Right? So what would be interesting here is to listen to our three panelists speak to these kinds of questions. And what I would like to suggest to them is to take, let us say, sort of make an introductory statement about some issue that they think is important to them, or speak to some of these kinds of questions about March 8th or feminism or any of the kinds of things, or what it actually means to be a woman academic or filmmaker or artist in our times, any of the kinds of things that you think are of importance to you, whether you self-identify as feminist. If you don't, why not? Should there be other kinds of identifications? What is the relationship between politics and our lived experience? Anything that you think is central to your lives would be of interest to us to discuss here today. So if each of you could speak, let us say, for about 10 to 12 minutes, and we do a round of first statements, and then depending on what is thrown up by each of the speakers, we can do a second round, and let's see where we are at that time. And then if we think we want to open it up for Q&A at that point, we can open it up for Q&A at that point. If we think that we want to have each of you wishes to sort of add something else, we can do that too, right? So it's very, very informal in that sense. It's not sort of, etched in stone how this should be. But what I'd like to suggest is that we take just say 10 to 12 minutes in our first statements. Thank you so much. So could I call upon Priya first?
Thank you, Arnima. Thank you, KCHR, for inviting me. When the invitation came, I was thinking a bit about how my 8th March generally used to be. And these days, even thinking about what is it to be a feminist in this time, etc. So when I look back, I remember it was a gradual journey, the journey of celebrating 8th March, as well as my journey of being finally calling myself a feminist, from coming from Kerala, fearing, oh, I don't want to be a feminici, to claiming it, I'm a feminist. So that was definitely a journey. So I remember 8th March is generally for me like IAWRT, it is an International Association of Women and Radio and Television. We generally have this 3-day South Asian Women Festival, where we used to showcase a lot of works from women filmmakers. So it was just a film festival initially for me. I started attending the film festival as a student, and then being part of the festival, and then being a festival director, etc. I figured out from my experience of working 13 plus years in the media industry, in the television industry, in the film industry, that it's not just a celebration, it's also making a statement. It's also a time we actually say that, look around, there are so many women filmmakers around, there are so many women technicians around. And sometimes it became so important that we have to say it loud, we have to underline these things. I can share one experience from my NDTV days, where I was working for almost 9.5 years. This is also linked to, the journey of the feminist in me was gradual. It was not like thinking I'm a feminist, but I was seeing around, there were many things around me which was not fair or which was not right. And I was very curious to know, why is it like that? So in the department, in the channel, there was one department which was the editing department, where there was not even a single woman as an editor. So I was very curious. Every department had like so many women, and me coming from Jamia or Mari Values, where I did mass communication and journalism courses, and I have always seen so many women. Like in my 50 batch of Jamia, I remember there were only 10 boys, the 40 were women. So I was wondering, where did those women disappear when it came to working? So I reached out to the head of the department and I asked him, why don't we have any women editors in the team? And he said, I don't even select them. I don't even look at their CVs. And the reason he was saying was, oh, they have problems with night shifts. They just gossip around, sit around. So I don't even look at, the women CVs, like the CVs sent by female candidates. So I really understood the power that he was holding that time, and actually making a decision who should be in his team, and actually deciding who is actually editing news in a national television. So that actually put me into a situation that the power of who actually make the choices in different departments of film industry, media industry, actually decides who get to tell the stories. So for me, in my personal film journey, initially, the technicians happened to be women because it was more of the ease and comfort, or the characters' comfort, etc. But gradually, with these kind of experiences around me, it became a politics. It became a conscious decision that if I have the power to hire a team as a director, I would like to have women DOPs. I would like to have a women musician. I remember having one session where my musician Bindu Malini was there, and we were having an online session. And the audience were asked, can you name 3 female musicians, in not singers, but music directors from India? Hardly anybody was able to say 3 names. So it's not that female musicians doesn't exist around us, or female DOPs doesn't exist around us. So for me, that festival, which was just like a lot of women coming together and watching cinema, became a political statement. And I did see that happening in many things we were doing around 8th March. I can give one more example where currently I'm associated with an organization called Khabar Lahariya, Chambal Media. It's a grassroots rural women-run media organization. We work on mainly bringing in more women into the digital platforms, claiming, a mobile phone. During the pandemic, we did an 8th March event called Tumhari Bahu Mobile Mangti Hai, which means that your daughter-in-law is asking for a mobile phone. So the title of the session didn't just happen. It actually is a quote from a rural woman where she said that when I asked for a mobile phone, the neighbor commented, look, your daughter-in-law is asking for a mobile phone. How dare she? What is she going to do with a mobile phone? So when we think that, internet is so cheap, when we know that mobile phone is so easy to get, we have to realize that there are so many women around us who still find it like, asking for it is like a far thing. So right now my work is around that. So I feel a lot need to happen around those topics. And like I said, that me coming from Kerala, from a very traditional middle class family, where I started reading Madhavi Kuti, and my father thought that, she is getting spoiled by reading those books. And I feared to call myself feminist because I kept hearing, seeing, rolling on being this word around femininity, and for me that idea was very binary. It's like I don't, because the idea around was because I don't come from an academic gender space, but I thought that initially it is about women thinking they are better than men, etc., because that is the notions which were being fed to you. But slowly in the journey of meeting people, making films, I clearly realized that it's not just a binary, it's a multi-dimensional thing. I can just give one personal filmmaking experience. My first film is called My Secret Glass Ball. It was made on virginity. It was questioning the idea of virginity. So it sparked with this news report I happened to read on Madhya Pradesh government running a famous scheme called Kanyadan Yojana, where the state is actually getting women married. The state is sponsoring the marriage. But the qualification of women to participate in this mass marriage was a virginity test. And it was reported twice. And I was like, why a virginity test? It could be a health test, and men and women could have gone through it, but why just women, and why a virginity test? So I started talking about it around, like, with my friends, with my family, etc. And the more responses were like, why is she even talking about it? और कोई topic नहीं मिला इसको film बनाने के लिए. She didn't get any other topic to make a film. So it became more like, why not? And that time, without even understanding what is it to be a feminist, what does patriarchy, state, power, all these play a role, I was making a statement because I found something which was wrong around me and I was questioning. And when I look back, I do see that it was feminist in me questioning that, like around 10, 12 years back. I didn't know about what the state was doing, what the patriarchy or the society was doing. But I just felt that was something unfair happening. So yeah, that would be my opening thoughts on this. I will let my other co-panelists share their thoughts and then I will plug in. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I am a great admirer of Khabar Lahariya because I mean, I've been following their work right from the very beginning. And I think it's just a fantastic platform. And I got to know only very recently that you were associated with it. So that's very exciting. Can I call Aparna to speak now? Call upon Aparna to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, KCHF, for this opportunity, and thank you, Priya. So Priya and I, we come from the same college, so you can imagine that, some of the experience that she has shared is very similar to what I have. I was also, there were a set of questions that were sent for us to think around, and one of the questions was, what does March 8th mean? So I was thinking that, like Priya was saying, how the journey is gradual. My early memories of March 8th were about debate competitions, and there would definitely be a debate competition over, like mostly over women's reservation in parliament. So it was just debate. I mean, a debatable topic, and you go there and from college, and that was it. But so it was very interesting for me to know that about when I remember was talking about marches and demonstrations, etc. That how much of perhaps our early young lives were sequestered in a certain way, where we were not given an opportunity to get that sort of political introduction. But I would say JNU and Center for Women's Studies sort of changed a lot of things for me. And perhaps that is where, my interest in academia is also strongly rooted, how democratic are classroom spaces. And uh, I remember the idea of March 8th as a day of celebration sort of came from me, at least from those experiences. We would have a set of talks, we would have cinema being screened, you would meet women from all walks of life, from base-picking communities, from trade unions. Not just that, I remember once we had a whole session on masculinities on Women's Day. So it was a completely different way of approaching the world, and I'm extremely thankful to also the eclectically brilliant seniors that I had were searching on a variety of topics, and our progress reports were extremely. I mean, I remember those meetings that we used to have, and then to have a glimpse of into other research worlds, and to the idea of freeing yourself in research is something that, and I say this because I come from a discipline called international relations, where gender is at most, at least how it is usually taught, seen as very marginal. And when we're doing research, the most important question was to come up with a workable hypothesis. But when you shift into another, when I shifted to gender studies, that was the most freeing thing. That hypothesis was first thing which was put into the dustbin. Because how can you come up with a hypothesis before you sort of do your research, right? You cannot go in with preformed understandings. Secondly, the question about, do I identify myself as feminist? I do. And when I say that, I was thinking, what do I mean? I do I do say that I am feminist because I feel that I'm part of a community. And when I say community, I don't know how to sort of define it, but I realize it's very different from family. But it is also sort of usually said to be like a family or an alternate family also. It's right where certain things which you cannot discuss respectfully within other spaces of um, personal spaces could be done. And I'm very thankful that, like feminists have built such spaces, women have built such spaces at a lot of risk to their lives also. And also with so much of ingenuity and joy. And that is that, like I remember while we were growing up, women's spaces, like I come from a family where um, all of them worked. My mother, their sisters, everybody worked, and they worked in the sense we come from a lower caste family, so there's a lot of investment in education and getting a job. It was very important for us. So these Sundays will be extremely an interesting time because this is the only time that they get where so they would decide to cook less and then to share dishes, and there will be a lot of conversations, and the conversations would be, and it would be derogatively called as Kochu Vartamana, small talk, by some of the men, not all the men in the family, but some of the men used to say Kochu Vartamana. But the small talk was also a space for such large issues. Like, I have overheard these women in the family talk about sort of workspaces which are not always very conducive, but how they sort of have managed it, a certain probably a certain boss or a manager, the differences in them coming in, and in the effect that it has on their work. But also this constant saying of excellence in work, but saying that this is the way to sort of get beyond caste discrimination, etc., which might not be true, but this whole idea, like when people talk about reservation, etc., and I do think that what gets invisibilized is the sort of investment which is made in education within lower caste families, and that has to be acknowledged. And I know this because I've gotten married into an upper caste family, and I see how there is a lot of difference in how. So for them, women not going to work is then much more of a I don't know how to put it. That is more respectable in certain ways. I'm not trying to brush it in black and white, but I'm just saying that that is also there. And also now to come to the last question that was given to me, what are the issues that I'm grappling with? Now I'm on the other side, very, like, it's just been 6 months, but I realize the pull of power. I do see the seduction of power within the classroom, like, you can run it like a small kingdom if you want to. And and then I also realized that, how hard it must be for the students to be in such a space where, the power relationship is very much there. So, I mean, that is something which we cannot not recognize. Say that, oh, it is a democratic space. It is not to start with. So much of onus is on us, on the teachers and the educators, but also how to make the space joyful. It is a constant struggle. And then also, most of my students, I see they are straddling digital spaces. Last, like, I'll stop with this, that there was a comment that I had seen under a photograph where a woman was discussing about if I should put this. I sort of was thinking about putting this photograph, and the sort of dilemma that she went through, putting a putting a private picture of hers online. And there was this one comment that sometimes I wish I was invisible, or I want to make myself invisible because of the sort of incursions in my space. And that sort of struck me, like this constant invisibilizing, and that we are doing to ourselves, and so much of policing that we are doing to ourselves to sort of safeguard. It's not just because, it doesn't come from a space of humility or false respectability, but to keep ourselves safe in certain ways. And I don't know how to define it further, but that is, I think, a dilemma that we face. And I think I'll stop here and maybe in the next round. Thank you.
Thank you, Aparna. That was really very interesting, especially the big dilemmas that we face through our lives. I mean, starting with the family, where and that was there in what Priya was speaking about as well, which is so much that we learn, so much of support, yet so many of our battles are first fought within the familial space. I mean, and it gets more and more complicated when one brings in other kinds of equations into it, be it caste or questions of sexuality and, class, other kinds of things. It's a difficult one. Perhaps if time allows us, we can open up some of these kinds of things. Our last panelist is the artist Veda Trivedi. I thought perhaps since Veda wants to share a few images with us, I thought it might be best if she comes on now so that she also finds the space to be able to share that and speak to the kinds of images she wishes to share with us. Veda.
Yeah, hello. No, so I wanted to share images just to give everyone a sense of where I'm coming from, because it isn't necessarily from a sort of visibly feminist position, but it's not that. I think like this, what Aparna brought up about invisibility is something that resonates with me in the sense that I think to a large extent, I work largely with the environment and with animals and plants and the landscape. And I mean, at a point when, say, I was studying art, there was, of course, an interest in human figures and stuff. And then as I sort of came into my own, I moved away from the human form and moved into this environmental space, almost as I feel like to create a safer space where I can talk about certain things without meeting resistance or confrontation, because I think for me, I find it very difficult to operate comfortably in a space where I'm constantly met with resistance. So I think I like to work with work with what I have as opposed to work against what I don't have, and I think that politically, it's sort of, that would be where I position myself politically. So it's not necessarily about, naming, like saying that this is the issue that I am addressing, or, this is what I want to talk about. It's sort of a place that I arrive at through a certain methodology. And this methodology for me is very inherent to my being, and which inherently is like, say, like I approach spaces with a sense of care, and I approach the world around me with an element of care, and I'm tentative around how I talk about certain things, which is why I find it difficult to say that this is what it is or that is what it is, because also when in doing so, I feel like sometimes you feel like an imposter, like, am I doing enough, am I not doing enough? So I see it more as a process that I'm sort of constantly dealing with and negotiating through as I work and navigate these spaces. So I can show a few images perhaps, and very quickly, just to give a sense of the sort of work that I do, and also kind of quickly talk about what what the processes that they involve. I can share screen. Yeah. Do you see it? Is it full screen?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is an installation that I did when I was in college. So it uses bones, organic material, and the stands have pieces of poetry, and it's material that I collected from campus. And the context of this campus was also, it was the wetlands, and the wetlands are sort of being eaten into with development, and located in Dadri in Uttar Pradesh. I studied in Shiv Nadar University. So it's work from there, and the sort of focal point of this was I mean this installation came out of, because I used to rescue a few animals on campus. This was one of the dogs that I lost while I was on campus, and the installation came soon after, so it became a way to kind of address that loss, and and there was also a lot of opposition towards stray animals on campus by the authorities. So there was constantly this conflict that one was dealing with as somebody that cared about these things, cared about plants, cared about animals. So for me, that life in university on campus was largely to do with finding a space as an artist within this campus that sort of stands for a lot of things that one stands against. So then how is one to find that safe space, And so that's where it was kind of, to some extent. I mean, of course, the art department itself operates in that way, where we're constantly doing things that, the rest of the, a lot of the, I mean, the majority of, say, institutions there don't stand for or don't stand by. So, I mean, there's always this conflict that used to happen at the time, and, a lot of it came from there. This is another installation. This was my graduate installation, after which, so it uses shadow, light, and again, organic decaying material. So I was working with these notions of this. I mean, a lot of it was my own anxieties around loss and death, and then trying to address that by working with material that, is perishable. So grappling with that anxiety. This was at Pepper House in Kochi in 2018. So it again used similar material, sound projection, and so on. So I mean, so what I think what becomes relevant here is also, I mean, to this discussion, is also how a lot of what I do involves, say, drawing or walking around in public spaces and drawing. So how, as someone that's drawing in public spaces, also the sort of spaces that I choose to draw in are spaces that ought to be safe for me as a woman, and then it's a big part of it is determined by that, which I later realize is that, spaces that are in nature and the wild are safer than, say, the, a busy marketplace or something, or especially in suburban rural context, which is where I was working from at the time. So in a city, of course, like when I was studying in Bangalore, I used to walk around the city and draw, and that negotiation with passers-by or the conversations with passers-by was very different from the kind of interactions that potentially would happen in, say, a place in Dadri. So then, and in Dadri, as an outsider, as a, non-native speaking, I'm not very comfortable with Hindi. I'm a South Indian. All of these angles sort of play into it. So I think, I mean, I don't need to show too many more images, but this is just the sense. This is just to sort of give a sense of, the sort of work that I do, and how I kind of also position myself vis-a-vis how I position myself, say, like, politically. And I've stopped sharing, no? Yeah. And yeah, so when these questions were posed to me, I think, I mean, to be a part of this panel, I was wondering how best to sort of talk about this. And I think, what becomes like, for me, the way in which I express myself, articulate my practice, is generally perhaps a good way to explain how I express myself politically as well, where it is, I sort of try to talk about the process as it occurred rather than state an intention. And so the intention is really merely like a direction as opposed to a goal that I'm trying to, arrive at. And the other thing, yeah, I think especially like in recent years, I've worked from a very isolated space. So then the way that I talk about my feminist position also is largely to do, or my position, let's say, is largely to do with the context that I'm speaking from. So then when I'm on my own, I can talk about all of this in a very sort of liberated way. I'm also a second generation artist. So there were certain roles that were already subverted by, when I came into the world, let's say. And so that I haven't necessarily developed a language to assert myself, or develop the need to sort of assert myself in space in a particular way. But then how this then manifests when I'm interacting with the outside, it can sometimes seem easy, but sometimes it's also jarring, where there are certain instances, I mean, of course, I know that one knows that there is a difference and there are injustices, but then I think for me, it's hard for me to isolate that these are women's issues, and it's more intersectional for me, and in the way that I think about it and address it. So yeah, I think we can have a opening. Yeah, this can become a conversation. Yeah.
That is really so very interesting. I was maybe when you come back and when you speak to some of these kinds of things, what I would be curious to hear about is also to do with, what it meant for you when you were an art student and classroom experiences, be it teachers or, other students, then artists. I mean, after all, the art world is still exceedingly masculine. I mean, this is something that we do. It's also very, very market oriented. And so there are complicated kinds of issues at stake here. I mean, if I think of anything that is, of course, cinema too, but, there are independent filmmakers who have been struggling with many of these kinds of questions, and it's not so sort of yoked up with capital in a way in which I find a lot of artists, and there's a way in which I don't find them questioning that. People whose work I admire enormously. So it's an interesting set of issues that it opens up for us to think about. But let's come back to some of these things. I think the question about tentativeness is really so important. The question of care, the question of invisibility that both you and Aparna invoked in such different and important ways. I think that is extremely important because, if we take that back to the kind of way in which Priya was speaking about the absolute absence of women editors, in NDTV when she was there, it's not even that they were invisible, they just weren't there. What do we do with these kinds of things? What do we, much as we all wish to move away, and I'm not taking a position one way or the other, I can understand the difficulties of this. But there are situations in which assertion becomes willy-nilly something that is sort of imposed upon us. Whether you like it or not, you have to go there and fight and so on. And then, of course, then you also have to bear the label of being called, oh my God, she's like that. She fights, she yells. And most women have, through generations of, socialization, indoctrination, they're made to feel that they should be soft and gentle and nice and so on and all of that. So, these are dilemmas. These are our struggles. They're so complicated. whether it's the issue of, sexuality and its policing to any space that women inhabit on their own. When I was listening to Veda, I was thinking that I was once asked, I'd gone to Nehu, I was there for a week as a scholar in residence, and I was doing a bunch of talks, and some students asked me, so have you felt oppressed? And I thought, oh God, now that's a tough one, because by and large, no. I mean, I have a privileged life, and in the years that I've worked, it's become more and more so. But if you ask me, the one area which is completely out from my life is the space to get out and walk out in the middle of the night and wander the streets, which I would love to. I really like walking. But the way in which women inhabit public spaces, particularly in this country, but in any country, any space, the ability to navigate those spaces is so difficult. And if we start, from those kinds of things, we find that much hasn't changed, even though, the issue that Priya had fronted earlier, which is her classroom in MCRC had, 40 women and 10 men kind of thing. I mean, those numbers are certainly changing. But if we ask a young audience to name, let's say, the best documentary filmmakers that they know, 9 out of those 10 will be men still. It'll all start with Anand Patwardhan and go on like that. And, it'll be those kinds of things, the people who are showcased. So it's an interesting business. And I think that we do need to work with the mess of this and what we are, what the pushback allowed us and what it didn't, and how we need to work at certain things. Yeah. All right, so let's go back to Priya.
I just wanted to add to the space and women conversation which Veda started and Arunima added. I remember while I was making my last documentary, Coral Woman, I was in Kodaikanal. And I remember I was looking for a space to edit my film, like for a month. And I remember every answer was like, bring a man, then we'll give you a house. We won't give house for a single woman. And I remember this being repeating, echoing in very many colleagues I have met. For example, in Khabal Leheria, we have this Muslim woman, single mother with 3 children. And she was like, in the last 3 years, I have shifted the house 6 times, because what is she doing at night? Why is she coming late? So all those questions related to your profession, what time you're coming, leaving, or even determines to get a space even in today's time. And I also understand it's not just in the offline space, even in an online space, we do see this creeping patriarchy and gender problems. If a woman is online at 12, I have like so many young people and elder people telling, the kind of comments and the kind of messages which they receive. And what does that mean? I remember like once one air hostess, I was trying to take a case study around this virginity topic. And she said that, there is always stereotyping around the profession you do. And I was able to relate to her, because when I picked journalism or filmmaking, I have heard like my relatives telling my mother that like she won't get married. It will be difficult to get her married, because she's a media person and she'll be working at late night, etc. So it's very interesting how we as women then negotiate the space around us, but it also made us feel to claim it, right? Why do we have that night walks, and why do we say that, we want to be out there? I still remember the first time I had my night walk in Trivandrum. It was during the Kerala Film Festival days. And I can't forget that one day, where I was out there around the Tambanur Statue Road, where I was just walking in the night with my friends. It was so powerful. And I don't think boys in my batch would have felt the same while walking or driving at night. But like also while saying that, it's not everything negative. I think over the time we have also learned to use this kind of stereotyping of women as our strength and power, I have started using that. For example, when I was shooting my film in Thoothukudi, that was a time I was shooting the film across the Gulf of Mannar coast, and it's a very fragile area where a lot of political problems are there, and there is a lot of policing happening. And if you take out the camera, the people will come and police will come and just take your footage out, or the corporates will come and claim your camera, etc. And I have been stopped by people and asking, what are you shooting? And then I just play fool. Because I know that that card really helps me. And I said, oh, I didn't know. Oh, I should switch off my camera. Okay, let me do that. Because I know that what that person will be thinking that I am harmless, kya karenge? Like, what will she do? You know, how far she can do. So I now use it as my power, my gender as my power as well. Because I remember I got a call from a male filmmaker from Tamil Nadu, and he said he was actually arrested and his footage was deleted in the same coast. And he wanted to know, how did I shoot my film in that in the same coast? So sometimes we use that vulnerability in in an interesting way to claim spaces and do things. So I am just sharing that, I have started using the kind of suppression or the kind of stereotyping around me as my power as well.
If we follow the same order, Aparna.
It was so interesting to hear Priya and Veda talk about space, and like that is a recurring thing that we usually have in conversation. How much space can we take? And then it's always predetermined in certain ways, especially if you're a woman working in academia. You would have your voice, etc. But there's also a burden of not shaking the table too much. I mean, shaking the status quo too much. So again, going back to the self-policing that sometimes we do, until it reaches a point where you're like, okay, I mean, I don't care anymore, and then they're like, what happened to you? But till that point, so that is one. And also the idea of care, like what is different about feminist friendships, or women friendships, which is very different from the care usually um, expected out of us from in the caste of mothering, right? So it's something that I have been, it doesn't mean that a lot of it isn't in the same vocabulary. Like, for example, cooking food for a sick friend. And I've had countless friends of mine cook me hot soup when I have been, and then, nursing broken hearts, but I don't know, like when it's expected out of it, especially which is also then linked to the whole mother guilt that we are supposed to feel like constantly, right? So, for example, like last time I was in another city and I had a friend along who's a mother and her colleague who's also a mother, and they had young children waiting for them back home. We had all made a plan to go for a night movie. And then within half an hour, all the mothers in the group had to cancel the plan. The only male member who has 3 children was the only one who didn't have a problem. And it was mostly because either the children would call and cry over the food. But I was thinking, this constant pulling apart from all directions, and how can we make spaces for enjoyment, and this are very innocent fun that we want from life, right? And how can we as women sort of make that happen for other women? Like, Priya, you were talking about night walks. I was also thinking about going for films, night shows alone. I mean, with women, it's okay now. But, if you have to go, I mean, I have a very strange sense in movies. I like masala movies. A lot of my friends don't share it. But now, like if I have to go for a movie alone, I find it very difficult in Kerala to go to a movie. Otherwise, you have to go to, say, Shinois or whatever. And like, those spaces. Like, so that is something that I've been thinking about. Also, this idea of soft woman, and like what do we do with the rage that we have, like the anger that we have. I'm a very angry woman. I've always been, and but also then how do I sort of, I don't know how to put this in words, but how do I articulate my anger without causing hurt in the patriarchal way, which is what we have been also taught, certain. I don't know if it makes sense, but just thinking out loud. Thank
And examples it might help if you tell us, Aparna.
Like the classic trope of breaking things, and most of the things are like like I've spent so much money on it.
All my things are kept away when you come next.
Or maybe the language that I get to use when I'm angry, or how to sort of like articulate what I'm angry about without being reduced to just an angry woman. Most of the time, I feel like people don't take me seriously when I'm angry, like seen as a face that will then then you sort of think that okay, but the thing remains unresolved most of the time.
Veda.
Yeah. No, this thing that you brought up soon after I spoke about, how, like, as a student, what it was like. I think, I mean, I was reminded even while Aparna and Priya was speaking of this thing that I hear quite often from, let's say, men, which is this sort of very blasé kind of relaxed attitude that, I don't need very much. I can live anywhere. I can, I don't basically, like, I can even be out on the street and it's perfectly fine for me. To sort of give off this air of not needing very much to live, get by. And then I realized that as a woman, I mean, one needs a roof over one's head for a night at night in order to just be safe. It's like a basic. You need a house, you need a, you can't just be wandering the streets at night without a room to sleep in, for instance, And this always sort of, it always, I mean, I think whenever I would hear this, there was this sort of, I felt like I was being told that I was spoiled, maybe, that I need more than, but then I realized that, but it's not that, it's also like, I can't possibly just be out on the streets without a room for the night, And so I feel like the way I have dealt with this attitude of I don't need much is that it gets translated into material. Like I don't need very much material to work with. I can do with just a piece of paper and pencil, and I can draw, So it can't possibly exist, say, in like walk around the streets, aram, say, like, I mean, without needing very much, but it would then translate to what I can do with very little. So it's again this almost like apologizing for oneself for how much space one occupies, and I mean, this was on my mind because I think especially among artists, there is sort of like this there is, I mean, at a I don't know if I can say that this is how it is, but then there is this respect for people who need very little, I don't need much, and then what that really means when you're a female artist in in India, and young and a student. So you actually don't have very much money to kind of really afford too much anyway. So I mean, as a student, so this is something that I was reminded of, which is always something that has bothered me through, how do I now I understand where it comes from, but when I first heard it, it did make me feel sort of, apologetic for myself, almost like, oh, why do I need this sense of safety, security in order to? So that's one thing. Yeah. yeah, I mean, we can.
Anything that any of you feels you want to jump in on and add more? Or,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
just wanted to add a bit to what Aparna was talking about feminist community and friendship.
Yeah.
That is incredible. I think that's actually teaching us a lot, and the feeling that you're part of a community is really special. And I remember, like, I'm learning so much from my Khabal area women, for example, the idea of power. And when it comes to, for example, in our organization, when we even make a hire, we are a full women team. The entire organization, we are some 40 women across North Indian belt, which is our diversity is also our feminism, because it's like how someone like me coming from an urban background work with someone who had never been to a school and still produce news and film and storytelling. Can we do that together? Because our knowledge from two different spaces coming together, and etc. And also the idea of power that I learned from my peers who were in the leadership before me, letting that power go. Like, that's one big learning, and I learned from my peers that it's like Aparna was talking, like, it's very, power is very interesting to have and hold, but the feminists around me have taught me or is teaching me to let go that power also. In our organization, we have somebody who is from a Dalit background, coming from a rural India, as a CEO of the company, and our, when we have a hire, we have a vacancy, how do we still look for that one girl from a rural small town or a village to come and work with us as an admin, an HR person, or a producer, or a editor. And the journey is not easy, but we know that if we make that attempt and if we give that chance, there is a lot of talent and people around who can actually reach that position and make a change. How do we bring those voices out there? Otherwise, it will be the same set of people talking and the same issues talking. Like we have feminist literature written by a lot of upper caste women, but why not from why so less when it comes to Dalit writers? So we need to fill in that gaps. So yeah, I just remembered that, and I completely relate. I have also received so many soups and so many letters, love letters, and postcards, and that tab when you're really low from my feminist group. It's the strength, right, in whatever you are doing. So I also relate to what you shared.
But do you want to add something else to what you were saying? Or
Not much, but also the idea of having perfect bodies is also something that I just wanted to put in the mix, because as you age, I see not, I mean, it's not just about health, keeping your health intact. I'll share something which happened to me. So I had a C-section, and I remember, there was a period of recovery, and the first 3 days was spent in the hospital. And there was a nurse, very young nurse, who would come to sort of, nurse the wound and then dress it again, etc. So I remember second day, she came in. She told me that about the importance of wearing push-up bras. So here I am, half naked, with stitches, and then in a lot of pain. And then this woman and she put it in a way that she was saying that don't you see women in bus stops, when you're going in buses with breasts hanging, and men don't age as fast as we do. And I could see from what she was telling me that she has had this conversation with perhaps most of the new mothers in the hospital. And I don't know, probably my hormones or whatever, I actually felt very sad for her. Like, I felt like this huge mothering instinct come over me for her. I was thinking, this very young woman who has not been a mother, and she's thinking that, but clearly in a professional capacity, I've seen a lot of women go through it. And this is a knowledge. which is passing on. So the sort of injurious knowledge that needs to be passed on, and this obsession with having, say, staying young. I mean, I don't know if these are trivial questions, but I keep hearing this, and like, not with sickness. And sick body is a different question altogether. I mean, when falling sick is, another you can only see them through the angle of sympathy, or a disability in a certain, in our very constrained understanding of it. Something that I want to just put it out there, because
I had an experience at Trivandrum actually. I was wearing a suit and I had a dupatta around my neck. And I was crossing the red light, and there was a lady coming right opposite to me. And in the middle of the road, she just pulled my dupatta without even, it's a complete stranger, just pulled down my dupatta and said, Beta, like, more like, ingane idana. That means like, just put it like this, covering my breast. And I also remembered, like, once we were diving with some researchers in the Tamil Nadu, a PhD student was with us, and we were talking about one of the diver who's, so I had two women divers cinematographers for my shoot, and one of them was talking about she's on periods, but she was wearing a menstrual cup and she can still dive. And this researcher was also with her, and she was like, that's very interesting. Even I dive, but during my menstrual days, I don't. So we took her through the journey, how you can, what it can. And next day when I met her, I asked her, so are you planning to dive today? Did you buy your menstrual cup? She said, oh, my husband denied it. He said, you can't insert anything else in there. So yeah, we are still living in this space also.
Yeah, the body image issue is so complicated, isn't it? Because it's raised and spoken about. Of course, I mean, women experience it. There is an age-related issue, and age is very distinct from gender, because if I switch this around, for a long time, I've been wanting to write a piece called When is Feminism? Because there is an assumption that all feminist issues are during the period between menarche and menopause. Once you're menopausal, of course, you cease to be a woman. So what kind of feminism is there anyway? And nothing speaks to older women at all. So it's an interesting business of what, how we work with the category of age in relation to gender. It doesn't always speak to one another in quite the same ways. But even within this, I mean, as we know, disability studies is what has actually shaken up many of the kinds of assumptions of, able-bodied women's anxieties around bodies and so on. And then there's been a lot of issues around, the normal body is something that has been queried from so many points of view. So let us say, some of the battles have been around people who are seen as too fat. I mean, when all these things acquire a different kind of, I mean, of course, we live in a different kind of time, in the sense of everything is being cancelled. So if you have a point of view that differs from others, you may be cancelled. But having said that, I think it's important to remember that there is something about body shaming that is actually being addressed far more I think the first impulse of questioning that, and I agree with you, but the first impulse of questioning that really comes from disability, and feminists with disability have really spoken to feminists without disabilities, asking about, what does disability even mean? And what does the perfect body even mean? And why is there this kind of anxiety around that? And, and that really makes us sort of turn the mirror back at us and, open this up in a different kind of way, rather than a policed body or a surveilled body kind of way, where, there's something about proper society that is surveilling us. But I think there is a very, we are all involved in this in different ways. And if we keep going round the spectrum of opinions around this, we might find that we are, to use a language from other kinds of contexts, we are perpetrators as much as we are people who are at the receiving end of some things that can seem as surveillance or body shaming or any of these, or anxieties generated by the perfect body. And women's ailments are so complicated because, going back to the invisibility theme, for a very long time, for example, when one spoke about women's ailments, there was no discussion around heart disease as a woman's ailment. It's only much later with feminist scientists and doctors pushing back that we begin to have discussions where, say, heart disease is seen as a woman's illness, right? Otherwise, it would be reproductive organ related issues that would be at the most seen as women's ailments. But there's just so many, many kinds of things. And in more recent times, I've thought about this a lot because I'm constantly hearing from younger, older women of different age groups speaking about the crisis in endocrinal health and what the implications of that are for women's everyday life. And, going back to Veda's kinds of art practice and larger concerns, there are ways in which environmental issues are so closely related to health. And, how do we even begin to speak to that outside of the more readily available frameworks of care and the discussion around care that we now know and, of course, take very seriously. But I think there are really quite serious kinds of issues around that, which I think we want to speak about. But I want us to go back to this question about rage and anger and the ambivalence around that, which Aparna had raised, because I do think that that's a very serious issue. And this is something that women continuously struggle with. And I hear Aparna when she says that, we do not want to reproduce patriarchal kinds of forms of being angry. But is there any other? Is there a feminist angle? It's very interesting that those of us who see ourselves as resistors think that we can reclaim rage. The assumption being that we were so peaceful and sweet and nice, and now we're reclaiming rage. But it's a more complicated business, isn't it? So what is it about the difficulty of addressing it? And to that, I want to add another kind of issue, which I often have been bringing up in the last many years, particularly in the context of my JNU classroom discussions and other discussions in JNU, which is where the feminist community fails us, where we paper over differences, where we do not, it's the, sort of feminist equivalent of not washing our dirty linen in public, so in groups we fight like mad and people do not speak to one another and they're falling apart, things are breaking up. But, in public, the position is there are great friendships and everyone is caring and everyone is supportive and everyone. So there is an issue around this too. And it speaks to the question of rage and anger, but it also speaks to other kinds of ways in which we are as human beings. There is competitiveness and there is self-interest, the self-valorization. There's all manners of things. And we see that also within our kinds of communities. It's not that we don't. It's not that that's happening out there and here is this pure space. So so this is what I want to put back to you. And maybe if any of you wishes to respond to that, perhaps you could, and then we can open it up.
I think most of us are very tired of being that good girl, good woman, that shape or that design which is made and we were asked to put ourselves in from childhood, right? So, and with the experience, I somehow feel that we started seeing things with a lot of gender lens, things happening around us. It's not anymore so simple. I have had an experience with my ex-partner where he was asking to our help to do utensils on an off day, and she was denying it. And he was telling her and talking to her and requesting, I would definitely say softly putting it up and asking her, "Are kar do na diti, 10 minutes lagega, 10 minutes it will take." And she was saying, "No, bhaiya, I don't have time, blah, blah, blah." But it was so interesting to see that he was not seeing that she was actually saying a no. And when we had a conversation, I asked him that, if it was a man actually saying no, would you actually ask him again and again to do that? And then the response was like, you don't have to see everything with your feminist lens. And I'm sorry, but what happens is when you see so much around you and it comes automatically to you that things are not fair, and you question it. And sometimes I also understand that it's very easy for me, like Arunima, you said that, how do one feels in a space. It comes with our privilege, it comes with a lot of other factors, economical empowerment, anything which we make decisions. Like, for example, my current health, she comes from a lot of domestic abuse and everything. Though she earns much more, she can actually walk out or file an FIR against him. I'm like, why are you not doing it? And she's like, no, I need a man in the house. That the kind of protection a man being in the house gives her is, she prioritizes it more than the domestic violence or etc. So I respect her for what she's doing, but I also understand, where decisions are made by everyone. Another one point which I wanted to make, also related to some conversation we spoke about, that how we feel safer in places. For example, me in an Uber at 12 in the noon, driving in a Delhi lane, I don't have a fear. But the same me at 12 at night, driving with the same Uber guy, the equation changes, right? There is some kind of fear. You send like where you are to somebody, or you inform somebody that you are actually traveling alone, thing. So it's very interesting to see the same situation, same person react, feel in a different time altogether. Yeah, I just wanted to put that.
But now, Veda, any of you who wants to jump in now?
Yeah, no, not about rage, but this thing that you brought up about health, is something, because I say the past year I've been going to a going to visiting gynecologists, say like a few times in the year, and it's in those moments that I sort of am really confronted by my age and how outside of, say, the norm that I am, where the question that is asked is, are you married or unmarried? Which is a question that is to do with virginity rather than really my marital status. And then, I mean, it's just something that sort of, and then how old, like age, and then this, and then this, and then the sort of say like, okay, you have PCOD, so do I have to be concerned about whether I'm ovulating or not? And then this question that comes up, oh, but are you going to be having children now? If you're not, then it doesn't matter, and I'm just, I mean, say from a very objective perspective, there is a problem, a health issue, and then you want to address it, and the problem needs to be solved. It shouldn't be kind of determined based on whether you want to, have kids or not have kids. I mean, so at that moment, it sort of, and it's something that I was really surprised to sort of encounter, because the rest of my interactions are happening, say, in like in the artist space, where we are talking about all of these things towards liberation and stuff, and then suddenly you kind of, step into this doctor's clinic and you're asked this question, which really, I mean, it makes me, oh, I'm 32 already, and by this time, I'm 7 years too late to have a child, and this could become a problem, and yeah, that's when, I mean, it's, so this thing that you brought up about health, is like, and reproductive health and so on, it's like, on one hand, there's just, I mean, it's not a problem enough unless you're married and planning on having a child,
Oh, very true.
yeah.
it's also so Indian in so many ways. No? I mean, the way in which it's framed.
Yeah, yeah. So then also, like, when I talk about this with my friends, we sort of try and look, okay, who is a, we need a young gynecologist, not someone that's too old so that we're comfortable to share with them, or like these types of things. And it's just like, kind of, if you really think about it, it's bizarre conversations to be having, how do you choose your doctor?
But JNU students, and I should have that document somewhere with me, at one point, about a decade ago or a little over that, had done a crowdsourced thing, and it's a document that's really worth looking at. It was fantastic in terms of whom you can consult and what do they say in relation to a bunch of questions. And they had drawn up a list of women and male gynecologists in the city. And but just as a kind of database and how they had produced that information, it was really very, very interesting. If I can pull it up, I'll send it to you. Otherwise, I'll ask a young friend of mine who's currently not in the country, but she's one of the people who's involved in that. I'll ask her to send it to me and I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
Aparna, last words for the moment.
Very true that gynec's office, I mean, is the most terrifying place. I don't know why. Dentists, we at least have a reason why. But the crowdsourcing thing, which very this happened over Instagram also, I think last year, sometimes during the pandemic. And what Veda shared, the experience is so pervasive and so rampant. So many women came out with horror stories, of how they were treated, and like made to feel bad about a certain illness that they want to combat. And also this idea that we don't know our bodies well enough, or we don't own our bodies well enough, is also extremely there. If you talk about certain pain or certain, to sort of trivialize it, that is also very much there. But the crowdsourcing thing, I remember on Instagram, because women were fed up. So in Cochin specific gynecologists who were okay to go to data.
Okay, so should we now open it up for Q&A from the audience? Is that all right?
Yes.
So normally what we do, and I think Akshita announced this in the beginning, let me repeat it again. We ask people who have questions to type it in the chat box. We read it out. It helps us save time. If there's anybody with a typing disability and wishes to speak, if they can do the hand raise option, we are happy to ask you to speak. Questions, comments, anything else?
One thing while we wait for the question, this word that Priya used, vulnerability, is something that we didn't. I mean, I feel like it's something that I wanted to bring up as well, but I forgot to in the flow. And generally, it's like it's just in sort of how it works. In terms of how vulnerability is, like, one is vulnerable to certain violences, one is vulnerable to a particular form of oppression, and that form of that type of vulnerability, and the other usage, which is that of an openness or an emotional vulnerability, that sort of renders you powerful. I mean, powerful not in terms of like power, authority power, but just as being emotionally vulnerable and being vulnerable too. I mean, it's here we're talking about both, as women, one is vulnerable to these things, and as women, I mean, or women, I don't know. I mean, not in a stereotypical way, but how vulnerability is. I mean, one of the things that I was telling myself uh, to be able to, help me talk about these things is to sort of be vulnerable while I do it, so that it's authentic, you know. So it's just something that I felt I didn't bring up and I wanted to talk about. Yeah.
But isn't there a feeling that one can be vulnerable only in safe spaces? Is it actually easy to let oneself be vulnerable? Because there is nobody in the world who doesn't feel vulnerable at some point. But would it be possible, what would it
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think in an unsafe space, what someone has asked a question, I think.
No, Akshita will read it out, Veda.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, should I continue to respond to
Yes,
what you're saying? Okay,
please
yeah, no, I mean, that's what I think the difference is in how, I mean, I don't know, like, is there a theoretical difference in usage of how like vulnerability is used? I mean, one is vulnerable to a certain form of, I mean, so-and-so is vulnerable to this violence, this community is vulnerable to this form of oppression. So if it's an unsafe space, that's the form that vulnerability would, I mean, that's what vulnerability would imply in that context. Whereas in a safe space, it implies a certain power, yeah. And then then perhaps, yeah, is it if effective in the, I don't know, I mean, it's something that to think about, but how effective is it because we talk about care and we talk about empathy and we talk about vulnerability all in the same, it's like part of the same constellation of, say, virtues that one has while building making kin, let's say, and building communities and sharing and stuff. So, and these are words that are being used a lot now as well, sometimes overused, I think. It just becomes easy to say, oh, care and this is space. So I mean, yeah, I mean, it's something, it is, yeah, I don't know, it doesn't answer your question, but yeah, I didn't necessarily think of it that way in terms of safe space and vulnerability and what its implications are and that sort of, yeah.
Perhaps we can move to questions, Akshita.
So there's a question by Divya KV. Sometimes women thoughts are barricades to them. Move on. Like mother thinking on daughter safety as like. What solution for that?
I can share my thoughts on that. There is no one answer or one solution for sure, but I can speak about myself because, like I said, I come from a very traditional middle class Malabar family. And when I stepped into this field of journalism, media and everything, I remember my mother initially, if I don't reach home at 6 p.m., I will find her standing at the door waiting for me. And from there, it was not just my journey, it was also her journey of her not even calling and asking me where I am, what I am doing when I'm on a shoot and not making a call for days. But me also being equally responsible and informing and updating her where I am doing and understanding where her fear or things comes from. And also the same thing happens with initially what I was very active on social media platform, responding to everything happening around, putting my comments out. And then my relatives feeding her with, oh, look at what Priya is speaking on Facebook about XYZ. And then my mother calling up me and telling me, you are even, what will happen to your sister's marriage, if you are putting up things like this. The solution I found was to bring her on social media, introducing her to my world and my thoughts. And automatically that also stopped in some way. So I think it's like a journey we are all embarking, right? This is also a kind of a relationship which me and my mother had built over the time. Yeah, so me being a feminist on that way, I think my mother was also being a feminist in one way. Yeah.
Thank you. So there's another question by Anasuya. How do you view intersectionality on feminism?
But if anybody else wants to respond to that mother-daughter question, they can. And we still would advise everyone to type in their questions if possible. Thank you.
There are also other questions. Should I read it out or should we just go by one?
Maybe you can read it out for everybody else, and then.
Okay, ma'am. So the next question is by Basima Mohammed. Are the feminist circles so beautiful when it comes to the women from the margins? How the feminism can really practice intersectionality in order to realize feminisms? This is one question. And the other is by Radhika. Regarding gynec office experience, often it's horrible. I know, but still sometimes they may speak in the background of the health risk associated with the late pregnancy, right? How can we balance the interactions? Thank you.
I will take the question about the margins. I would say that it's not beautiful everywhere. Like Arunima said, that there are situations where there are complexities. There is a tokenism which is happening for the name's sake, having somebody from marginalized community or caste or gender being put in a position or a power. There is a lot of tokenism also happening around. So it's not always like a happy picture out there. But even when I say that, but there are also spaces where I have, like as I mentioned, where people have let go of power, understand that, how, like, for example, I can speak about my organization where we actually celebrate our diversity and the strength which each community member brings in doing what we are doing. And the idea of a power, idea of even it's always a community decision happening in terms of decisions happening in an organization, and even reflecting on with changing times, what way should we change, what kind of changes do we need to make, etc. happening. So yeah, like any systems in place, there are places where things are going wrong, but there are also places where it's actually beautiful. For example, we lost somebody in our team recently, and what we did was like to come together, celebrate her by reading poems and writing letters to her, etc. In a public space, having lunch together. That's also happening. Aparna, you want to take the gynae question?
Or both, or all the other questions, Aparna. It's perfectly fine.
Hmm.
different
I
things.
was thinking about the intersectionality question, in the sense that I was also it sort of links to Veda's talking about vulnerability, right? So I was reading Bell Hooks recently, and she's saying that, one way in which classrooms can be transformative is when the teacher opens up. I mean, you like not to expect the students to be always sharing, always the subject who's providing you with knowledge about their lives, etc. And this is something that, I have been thinking about a lot with regard to feminism also. Who gets studied? Which women get studied? And which women are expected to open their lives, their intimate details to the for probably not consumption, but at least what good faith are should we open up? And so, in one way, this can be tackled is by the power, the ones with the power, they have to address or accept their vulnerability, in the sense that Veda was talking, if I understood correctly, the vulnerability to open up, right? And to sort of, be vulnerable about your privileges also, right? Put it out there in open, and then, um, I mean, it's a risky proposition. There's a lot of hurt that might come out of it, but that might be a certain way to make feminist spaces more accepting, where, you don't expect only one, especially the margins, women from the margins, to keep talking about themselves, etc., and then to think that it is easy for them, and, the whole voicing out would automatically lead to empowerment, etc. Gynae question, I don't think it is so innocent that, it's coming from a health perspective. I think women should be, I mean, we are very, not just women, all human beings, very intuitive. No, when something is put to us to hurt us, or to sort of, make us feel bad about the bodies that we have, and bad about the life decisions that we have taken, not to have child, to push pregnancy, to abort, etc. It is so easy to sort of put it as into this idea that we only want good for you. We are, I mean, thinking only for your health. I mean, I think the only way this can be addressed is by by the health community, the them from their there should be a movement to make it more gender sensitive. I feel like, they need to know the vocabulary to be talking to the ethics in talking to patients. Most of the time, I feel like medicinals are supposed to be unfeeling, right? Um, like they are supposed to see the person or the body before them only as a body, like without social histories, or without any social background, etc. I don't know how productive that is. I'm deeply skeptical of that sort of medicalization of women's bodies. And I think that we know very well what to do with our bodies, what not to do with our bodies. And just because they have certain knowledge doesn't mean that they can be prying in that. We also understand when it comes from genuine anxieties, right? Um, like I had my child supposedly late. I'm like, there's a term for people, geriatric mother or something. very, very funny was what the doctor used for me, and I see myself as a very young woman. And then, to be called and termed as a geriatric mother was like quite a rude shock. But, like, obviously physiologically that would have certain issue areas. But what if I don't want to be a mother? No, why are you pushing it down? I'm here for another reason altogether. Address it at least. So I don't agree with that.
But we can't, the thing is that sexual politics in this country is so messed up, right? the question that they are not speaking to is the question they're dying to ask you is, are you sexually active? Right? Those are the kinds of, it's issues around women's sexuality, right? Now, none of these people are going to speak to that. I mean, it comes, this gets spoken about in so many kinds of ways, married, unmarried, if you're slightly older, then they might, and if it's a woman who is even a sort of lab technician and so on, so who's not sort of directly involved in sort of discussing your medical care or whatever it is, they can ask you probably a little bit more in an upfront fashion. But that's also very unusual. So it's an interesting issue around this. And unless and until, one of the ways in which much of all of this gets spoken about is because all over the world, it's not just this country or whatever, all over the world, it's the pushback from a small group of women around certain kinds of things and vocalization of different kinds of issues that makes it an issue. And, more and more, people begin to speak about it. I mean, wherever we stand in the spectrum around what Me Too should have been like or what it should not have been like, whatever it is, at least sexual violence in different kinds of forms and shapes acquired a kind of language, right? And this business of what Priya was just saying, I mean, cyberbullying is so common, right? So when in a context of such enormous cyber violence, this question about, why is this woman online so late is it's fascinating how you can use the same terms as constitutive kinds of ways of seeing the virtual world, right? The real virtual divide ceases to matter at that point. And that's, of course, in the case of cyber violence, we've seen this repeatedly. And, when this whole thing of auctioning Muslim, vocal Muslim women and the kind of violence that was being sort of directed towards them, but also generally women in cyberspaces or who are either politically active or journalists, filmmakers, particularly women who are visible, the amount of violence that is directed towards them is extraordinary. I mean, so it's, so you keep that in tandem with this, and in some ways underlying all of that, and that is something that is really, really striking about this country, that, the bottom line is whether you are somebody who has been violated or you are supposedly someone who goes to a doctor's clinic, you should not be sexually active in any way, and you should certainly not even desire to speak about it, whether or not you are. Even to articulate it is so condemnable, right? So it's a really interesting business, this. Akshida,
There is, yes, yes, ma'am. And there is another question by Divya KV. We have in Sanskrit, Karyeshu Dasi Karneshu for women, but why not as the mantras for male? How his behavior must in society? Is it right or true? Our Vedas also have two patriarchal spectacles. And Arundhati had told it would be wonderful to have a directory of feminist or gender sensitive gynecologists, as the general experience has been. More question by Pooja. Could you please share some thoughts on women's voice in public in terms of public voicing or speaking? Is this voicing in public are also related to what Aparna talked about the policing of self, of making us invisible in the public and so on? Thank you.
If there is a demand for a directory of feminist gender sensitive gynecologists, at least within the case of within Kerala, perhaps the School of Gender Studies in MGU can do something about it. We'll try and make a list. We'll take some time, but we'll also share it with KCHR. And I also think it's quite important, and we'll do what we can on that note. And I know nothing about Vedas, so I will not. But Arnima ma'am can take that question as a historian.
What am I supposed to? Sorry, I'm just reading the questions now.
Karyeshu Dasi, that one. Because history and Vedas, everything who had written it, men have written it, right? So we can assume there is no need or no gift needed. What would be written there? And we are also now seeing like how history is being rewritten, etc. So just see, even I remember watching this beautiful documentary which is produced by PSBT, which was a film on Zuban and other feminist publication. And in that film, it was saying even, the books which were written, published were all by men, even writing about what women felt and what women desired. So all were like from so someone was assuming this is what a woman might be thinking, feeling, experiencing. And now we can actually see the change, right? Why do we say female gaze when it comes to storytelling, etc.? Why do we find a difference when a lot of women technicians and filmmakers come and tell a story? So yeah, like Abana said, I don't know much about Vedas, but we can just think who had written it and in which perspective. So what would it reflect? And if a woman would have written a Ramayana or a Veda, how would that sound like? So that's why we have a version of Ramayana from, I think, Panchali, or who was it? Like another version, right?
Panchali, you're getting your epics slightly mixed up, but that's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
But there are so many Ramayanas in the country. It's not that there is only one. To Divya, my small suggestion would be that it would be interesting to read for you. Your question is so important. You may want to read Uma Chakravarti and Kumkum Roy, who are early feminist historians who work on the period and who have written really important things, texts from which we can really learn. And Uma's essay, Whatever Happened to the Vedic Dasi, I think is still a classic. But so that we don't repeat oversimplified kinds of things, I think there are very interesting kinds of readings done by people who work with those texts, who have Sanskrit and who can, have a complex reading of the text. It would be really interesting to read historians like Uma Chakravarti and Kumkum Roy, and they write in very accessible ways. So it's not as though those are very difficult texts to understand. Any of you, or all of you who wish to take on Pooja's question? Nobody wants to take on poor Pooja's question. That's come on, guys. Come on, women.
I mean, it's a very interesting question, but also very complicated and complex question, right? I mean,
complicated and complex answer to that, Amar.
I mean, does recognition only come if the voicing happens in public? Whose public is it? Like, who constitute this public where the woman has to voice out? And this is something that we saw it in Me Too movement also, right? Like, what is the time period in which a woman can talk about something which has happened to her? like what, like when we talk, what is there an expectation of what will come out of that public talking, right? Like, why is she talking about this in this forum? Or like the why is she talking about it right now? There's something which I find, I mean, feminism has a lot of problems, but something which I find heartening is that there is an ability to sit with difficult questions, even if we disagree. I mean, and also there's some sort of ethics, where, if even if there is a lot of infighting, we at least somewhere we realize that what we are doing is perhaps not the right thing to do, even if we have done it. I mean, this is my understand. I mean, like I'll also try, like my work on Sri Lanka is something that we talked before also, where our idea of sexual violence is that it only gets recognition when it's talked about. And then there is a thinker and writer called Sumati Shivamohan, and she writes about women refusing to talk about the violence which happened to them within the majoritarian rule still happen. They're refusing that script of them in certain ways. Instead, they are talking about survival, the last days of war, walking naked as a mode of survival. Like there's a re-scripting of their story from victimhood, where they're owning it. So when women are speaking out, I'm also wondering, like for example, on Women's Day, women are pushed to say certain things. This compulsion to share, and something which is happening in what I earlier talked about within Bell Hooks thing, right? Where you expect students to share about their very intimate details about their life, their family, and their issues, but there's no reciprocity in it. Yes, I don't know if it made any sense, but.
But I think let's go back to this question of whose public it is, right? I think that is at the heart of this. When we speak about public, I mean, I think, again, we need to pluralize it. If somebody raised a question about intersectionality. So the whole idea of counter publics came up mainly because we cannot speak about one unified public. Right? And if we are to say that in the Indian political context, a Dalit counter public is very significant and vibrant, then the question would be which Dalit feminists are actually heard within the Dalit counter public or within the general sort of mainstream idea of what the public is. So if we start with that, I think this question of which woman gets heard becomes more complicated. And to that, I think, when we were doing the hijab book, what struck me is how many young Muslim women are really very angry and articulate at this point, and pushed to a point they have all started to speak. And there is a way in which they are making themselves heard, and they're raising really, really difficult questions, particularly to mainstream feminism. Right? So the question is, when we speak about visibility and invisibility, there is also a question of, look at me, I'm going to wear a hijab. So you have to see me as a woman, you have to see me as a Muslim woman who wears a hijab. Right? Now, it is really complicated because there is a way in which the hijab nests within so many other kinds of narratives and ideas within Muslim minds, non-Muslim minds, liberal feminist minds, and so on and so on. Now, that complicates this question. So the idea of which public it is. So when Muskan Khan in her burqa turns around and yells at the fellows who were screaming at her with saffron shawls around their neck, she certainly speaks within the public in a way that we were made to sort of, sit up and hear her. We had no option. We had to hear Muskan Khan. We had to hear her voice. That's the young Muslim woman who was being stopped from going into the college in Karnataka. Right? So, I think there are moments, and I think that's where you can see the mobilizing of rage in very productive ways. Very productive ways which actually asks questions not only of, let's say, the Hindu right in that context, but also of many of us. Right? And I think that's something that we do need to stay with quite a lot.
Completely agree with what you just said, ma'am. I was also reminded of what Rekha Raj said in today's lecture that she delivered. തെറി പറയുന്ന ദളിത് സ്ത്രീകളെയാണ് മലയാളി പൊതുസമൂഹത്തിന് വേണ്ടത്. പക്ഷെ തിയറി പറയുന്ന ദളിത് സ്ത്രീകളെയാണ് ദളിത് സമൂഹത്തിന് വേണ്ടത്. So, like what is expected out of a woman to talk when she enters the public. Also.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Ma'am, the questions are over.
Okay. Any last words from our panelists? I think we will give the floor over to them. The virtual floor. Anything at all that any of you want to add to what we have been chatting about?
Thank you. Because, like, I don't want to say that because it's quite light and, though the questions that we were dealing with were heavily loaded, I didn't feel a pressure to perform, which is usually what is expected in academic conferences and lectures. I feel maybe the pressure just comes from a personal space, but I felt a sort of lightness to the conversation. And thank you to the co-panelists also for provoking certain answers out of me, but also providing so-called safe space to share.
Yeah, completely echo with what Aparna was saying. I was also wondering, like, this is such a topic. I was also thinking I can't speak from an academic perspective, but the experiences which came the way I wanted to share, and I learned quite a lot from my co-panelist. And I would love to hear more from the listeners, what you felt. And sometimes these kind of conversations strikes you maybe a day later, a week later, right? When you see something around. So yeah, if there is something which comes to you, please share. I'd be happy to listen.
Yeah, thank you for having me, because I think this is the first time I'm sort of speaking from this perspective. And I think the way I would also approach this, not knowing the context of who I'm speaking to, I feel like my position, not that my position would change, but the way that I would articulate myself would vary depending on where I'm speaking from. So here, the way I sort of positioned myself was assuming that there was obviously an established understanding that these are issues that need to be talked about, but then how one is dealing with it, knowing that these are issues that need to be talked about. So if I kind of came across as seeming dismissive of certain, dismissive of the reality of certain issues, the intention was more to kind of find ways to kind of subvert a mode of articulation and identify like a mode of articulation that is comfortable, I think, and that allows like a flow to be possible, movement to be possible, as opposed to get stuck within certain categories of expression even. So this is just something that I wanted to add.
Thank you all. I'm so happy we could do this. And I truly hope we will be able to get you all back for a sort of in-person meeting sooner rather than later. And thank you for at least having kickstarted this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.